Hi, thank you for joining our webinar. My name is Jessie Peterson. I am the Director of Education here at Sunray Construction Solutions. Sunray secures $10 billion annually for GCs, subs, and suppliers. We are a national construction document service. Today's webinar is conducted by the incredible Emily Pendleton, a Texas construction lien law expert. Today's webinar topic is protecting your right to retainage through liens and bonds. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the fabulous Emily Pendleton.
Hi guys, thanks so much for that warm welcome, Jessie. I am really excited to talk to you about protecting your rights to contractual retainage through liens and bonds. If you have any questions as I'm going through this presentation, please feel free to drop them into the chat box, and I'll be sure to try to provide some time at the end to get to them. And so I think that there's a lot of educational materials out there about how do you protect, how do you make sure and perfect your lien and bond claims as it particularly relates to unpaid materials and labor. But something that is a nuance under Texas lien and bond law is your right to contractual retainage and what the caveats are in terms of deadlines and notices that need to be sent as it specifically relates to protecting your interest in contractual retainage. So let's start first and foremost with what is contractual retainage. So it's a percentage of money withheld by the upstream party pursuant to a contract. And so sometimes you'll hear retainage being used in the context of what the owner is withholding from the general contractor. You'll also hear that called as the reserved fund. But today's presentation focuses primarily on the contractual retainage held either by the general contractor or a subcontractor of their downstream client customer. And so it's typically 10%, not always, sometimes it's 5 or something less, depending on what the parties negotiated. And these funds are for work that has actually been performed. If the work has been performed, but are typically not paid until completion of the work. And that might be completion of the subcontractor's specific scope of work, or it might be the work of the entirety of the project. It just kind of depends on the project and the terms of the agreement when those funds ultimately get released. Okay, so the general purpose and why contractual retainage obligations exist and get implemented into subcontract agreements is because in Texas, it's standard for project owners to withhold 10% of each invoice from the general contractor because it's required by Texas law per statute. So regardless of whether or not the prime agreement has a contractual retainage provision within it, the owner is still nevertheless required to withhold those funds. And contractors like to pass down that burden to their subcontractors through a contractual retainage provision, thereby withholding the same amounts of money that the owner is withholding from them. Owners are liable to lien claimants who properly perfect a lien for the funds the owner is statutorily required to withhold. And so that's the whole purpose in which this exists statutorily and contractually is actually for the benefit of lien claimants. And so today's presentation is on how to make sure that you protect your entitlement to that contractual retainage, which, issues come up related to contractual retainage at the end of a project all the time, because if there's anything that arises that the owner is hesitant in releasing the retainage or reserved fund that they've withheld from the general contractor, those issues can be passed down to the subcontractors and leave them with when am I going to receive my contractual retainage? And you just want to make sure that you protect your interests in making sure that you're able to get that contractual retainage. Okay, so just starting with I like hypotheticals and stories. So starting with hypothetical, right? You've got your civil earthwork subcontractor who performs work first on the project, doing all the site preparation, and that's 95% of their scope. And they perform that work over, the course of a few months, and they've performed 95% of their subcontract work, but retainage has been withheld, and they still have 5% left on their scope of work to come back and do the final grading on the project. And so retainage isn't going to be released towards the end of the project once that 5% is completed. Then, during the course of the project, it's nearing final completion, punch list is coming up. The owner detects leaks in the building. Maybe it's at windows or whatever, and says, contractor, what's the issue? Why am I experiencing leaks? Contractor says, oh, it's a design issue. This is on the engineer or the architect. Their design is faulty. Engineer and architect says, no, this is a construction defect. This is on the contractor. And owner says, I don't care whose issue it is. I want my building fixed. And until I do, I'm going to withhold the retainage and any, further amounts due under the prime agreement. And so contractor comes to its subs and says, well, I haven't received my retainage due to this ongoing issue that might result in litigation or arbitration. And so I don't, we have a pay if paid clause in our subcontract. So because I haven't received my retainage, you're not receiving your retainage. Okay, so under this hypothetical, what do? So you need to make sure and timely send your notice to perfect your lien as it relates to contractual retainage, and you need to send your notice to perfect your bond claim on bonded projects. So I'm going to go through what all needs to happen in order to perfect your lien or your bond claim, starting with the liens. This is a statutory form that needs to go out as it relates to unpaid retainage. So very simple, fill in the blanks and get your notice sent out. This notice needs to be provided to the original contractor and to the owner to perfect your lien claim for unpaid contractual retainage. I just wanted to point out too on this slide, there are two different forms under Texas law. The other form is as it relates to unpaid materials or labor, and different timeline is different deadlines apply to providing that notice as compared to the focal point of this presentation, which is unpaid contractual retainage. So what is the deadline for providing notice of unpaid retainage? It's the earlier of the 30th day after the date claimant's contract is completed, terminated, or abandoned, or the 30th day after the date the original contract is terminated or abandoned. And so more often than not, you're probably going to be operating under the first of these two, the 30th day after the subcontractor's work is completed. And so if you think about it, this timing is short, very, very short. Companies need to have a system in place whereby someone is tracking the very last day you perform work on the project and accounts for 30 days after that and provides timely notice, because say your invoice on, my hypothetical is your invoice goes out the day that you finish your final punch list work, and the terms are net 30. So right at the time that the invoice is due is the same date that you need to be providing notice of unpaid contractual retainage, and say your payment terms are net 45. Well, then you're going to need to get your notice out even before the invoice becomes due. But this is critical because the timing is important, and if you don't miss your pre-lien notice deadline for this, you don't have a perfected lien claim. And so of course then we need to discuss the deadline for recording your lien, which is much more reasonable. It's the 15th day of the third month after the month in which the original contract is completed. So we're talking the entire scope of the project is completed. My recommendation to clients is always that you never wait until only 30 days after project completion, that you don't give it the 3 months post project completion. And the reason is because under under the Texas Property Code, the owner is actually entitled to release the retainage within 30 days of final completion. And so although you sent your pre-lien notice, if they happen to forget it, release the retainage funds to the general contractor, you know, it's just always best to get it within that 30-day time frame so that the owner is certainly on notice that of your outstanding contractual retainage. And then of course, always don't forget to send your notice of the filed lien affidavit to the owner and to the general contractor within 5 days of recording your lien affidavit. Okay, so flipping over to the bond side. Let's start with the private bonded projects. So there's 2 ways to perfect your claim to retainage for private bonded projects. You can, first of all, follow the lien perfection procedures we just talked about. So making sure you send your notice within 30 days of completion of your work and getting your lien on file within 30 days of entire project completion. Then the second way is if you won't even need to file a lien if you're aware that the project is bonded, you have a copy of the bond, and you send your notice of unpaid retainage to the general contractor and the surety within 30 days of completion of your work. So the same pre-lien notice deadline applies. You're just sending the notice to the general contractor and to the surety. And then your obligation to record the lien affidavit, you no longer have that. I would also recommend that, you know, on the bonded project, you go ahead and still send that notice of unpaid retainage also to the owner. You know, there's never too much notice. And so there is a provision within the property code that states that when a Chapter 53 payment bond is in place, subcontractors with a direct contractual relationship with the general contractor are not required to give notice to perfect a claim for retainage. So that should give first-tier subcontractors a little bit of peace of mind. It does not apply to second-tier subcontractors. But nevertheless, I would still recommend complying with the notice requirements and getting your notice over to the surety and the general contractor timely of the unpaid contractual retainage. All right, and so now moving to public bonded projects, talking about first-tier subcontractors. This one is probably one of the easiest. You just have to send your notice to the general contractor and to the surety on or before the 90th day after final completion of the prime agreement. So 90 days after total project completion. And this is for first-tier subcontractors. And the contents of the notice to the surety and to the general contractor has to include the amount of the contract, the amount that's been paid by the general contractor to you, and the outstanding balance owed. As it relates to second-tier and lower-tier subcontractors for public bonded projects, you'll still need to comply with the requirements of the first-tier subcontractor, that being the 90th day after project completion, providing your notice to the surety and to the general contractor. But there's also an additional obligation of second-tier and lower subcontractors of a very short notice. You have to first mail your notice to the general contractor on or before the 15th day of the second month after the date you begin your work or first deliver materials, advising the general contractor that your subcontract agreement provides for contractual retainage and indicates the nature of the retainage being withheld. So generally speaking, just the terms of the retainage, whether or not that's 5% or 10%. And so that's a really short notice as well, to make sure that you comply with 2 months after you even begin your work, to make sure that you perfect your claim as against the bond for unpaid contractual retainage at the end of the project. And that concludes the timing requirements and things that you need to know in order to make sure you set yourself up for recuperating your contractual retainage at the end of projects in Texas. Jesse, I'll turn it back over to you to let me know if we have any questions.
Hi. First, let me thank you so much, Emily. That was a wonderful webinar. You provided some really great information about protecting your retainage. As for the questions, I do not see any questions at this time. However, if someone does think of a question, please feel free to reach out to myself or Emily, and we will be sure to answer any questions. Can you please go on to the next slide, Emily? Thank you. All right, please take a moment to review us on Google. We would really appreciate it. The next slide there, perfect. Our next webinar with Emily is Getting Paid Faster with Liens, Bonds, and Contracts. That would be at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on December 8th. So go ahead and register for free at sunraynotice.com/education. And that is all we have for you today. Thank you so much to everyone that attended. We hope to see you at our next webinar. Have a sunny day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you. Bye-bye.